Happy Halloween, the retro players. Welcome to another episode of our podcast. I'm your host, Draco655, joined by my co-host, Shootsy. How are you today, Spooky?
Doing good, doing good. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody, and happy Halloween to everyone as well.
This week on the show, we'll be discussing spooky Halloween themes games, sharing our thoughts on the hardest achievement we have done and the thing we did for them, and lastly, continuing with your thoughts on emulations versus original hardware document. So let's start off with the show with the first segment. Shoot, you're on deck, and Dick.
All right, so for the first segment, as Draco mentioned, I wanted to talk to everyone a little bit just about being that it is Halloween today, a little bit about Halloween themed games, spooky games in general, and the whole genre. And I've got a number of titles that come to mind when playing playing retro games that are kind of Halloween themed, have a lot of scary or spooky elements going on. One of those titles that I wanted to bring up firstly is the Addams family for Game Boy, which is a platformer that's a lot of fun, has some different achievements in there that can be a little bit tricky to get as well, like an entire deathless run. So the basis of the game is that you play as Pugsley of the Addams family, and you need to explore the Addams family house and essentially rescue everybody. There's a few boss fights, like three, four, five boss fights. It's been a little while since I played that title, but overall, a really fun game that's got kind of a spooky thematic element to it. And what about you, Draco? What horror games have you enjoyed in the past?
Well, speaking of this genre, so first of all, this genre for me, well, it's not something I like the most, to be honest, because these genres I always trying to avoid it for many reasons. First, I don't really like watching movies, horrors, or anything. I hate everything with blood in it. Even like I think I play like trauma centers with the it's like a doctor. I don't like it. And every time I tried to play like some horror games, I always got scared when I was a child. Like a very good example, I play some on a GameCube. I play Resident. I think it was Resident Evils. I don't know, it's four or something. And then I started the game and I said like, oh, that looked good. That looked beautiful. And I walked through without knowing what is going on. And then I see a little like storage place. I just opened the door and I run to the left side and I saw a freaking zombie just right there, like just like what the heck happening? I was like I almost threw the controller on the floor just because I was so damn scared. And then I tried to play a little bit more, but this is like a typical game where every time like something is very scary is happening, Traco cannot handle it. So I know like these generals have like a lot of feelings about like you. It's like compared to like racing game or other genres, you it's like you can have like some fears, you can have some sadness, you can have like excitement. So what it's like I have a question for you, Mr. Shoots. Like why do you love so much horror game? Because I know you like horror movies and stuff. So what's the thrill behind all that stuff?
Well, as a kid, I watched a lot of horror movies growing up, and so it's kind of almost been embedded in me as a person to enjoy anything that has horror elements or of the genre. I will say, to kind of go back on your point a little bit, I'm not a big fan of like jump scare type of horror, and a lot of modern games have like that kind of baked in as a survival horror element. I'm more just a big fan of games in general that have elements that are horror based or spooky themed, but like a lot of modern games, that's something that seems to be innately baked in is just like a jump scare, or like these moments where you have to like mash a button in like a cutscene or something to like break a zombie off you. You did mention Resident Evil 4, which obviously that's a little bit more of a modern game, or more a little bit more modern, I should say, than Retro Achievements itself. So it's not supported because we don't have any console support for like PlayStation 2 or GameCube just yet, but that is definitely one of my favorite horror games that I played in the past. I would just say, to kind of answer your question in short, though, because of all of the movies that I watch and being a big fan of the horror film genre, it's kind of something that I've always enjoyed, and kind of brings to mind, what makes a game horror themed, because there are a lot of there are a lot of loose fits within the genre. There's games that have a couple elements of horror, but they're not a true full-on horror game. Which brings me to my next game, which is Hexen. So to describe it a little bit, it's very similar to Doom, like runs on a Doom style engine. Um, but you can choose to play. I can't remember the three. I think there's three different classes. You can play like a wizard, or like a warrior, or and then there's like one other one. But it's like medieval kind of enemies and like horror. I'm actually looking at my achievements right now. I have those pulled up. So the three different classes you can play are the fighter, the cleric, or the mage. And your goal is to, like with any Doom style game, to get to the end, kill the final boss. There's just a lot of like the way that the game is set up in terms of the environments and the maps is really cool. Like it's got like a very dark and scary theme to it, like dark cathedrals and churches that you're going through and exploring. And there are areas where you can there's enemies like right around the corner. So it's not necessarily a true full on full blown horror game, but it still has those elements in there. And that's kind of, I guess, what I would think about when I think about kind of a loose fit. What about you? What do you think?
Well, I have two titles in mind, which I think for me they're quite horror games. Don't judge me anyone on that one, but my first titles is the Zelda Majora Mask. Why this game? Well, don't laugh at me first of all, but it's not a horror game movie, obviously. But every time I saw that the moons, like the big moon with the giant smile or something, like, and just like trying to run in, like just trying to make chaos in the stuff. That for me, when I was still a kid, oh my god, I mean that's why I don't play horror games, because just that little thing scared the shit out of me as a kid, and I never played that game after I see it. And even today, I don't think I really want to play that set, because I don't want to just seeing that moons again chasing me on me. And the other game also scare quite a bit me, which I think I mentioned into this podcast already, but the Yoshi Stories. I don't know why Yoshi Stories on N64 like got me, but I don't know, dude. This game is, I don't know. It's so scary, and it's other stuff like that. I don't like that, man. What do you think, shit, about my two games today?
No, I think you're exactly right. I mean, I think those would fall into like a very loose fit, emphasis on the very. But I would say, you brought up Majora's Mask, which I played quite a bit as a kid, and I also played Ocarina of Time. I would say, just kind of thinking about this out loud, that Ocarina of Time versus Majora's Mask. I feel like Ocarina of Time has a lot more light to dark and dark to light, contrasting elements, in terms of the narrative, like good versus evil. And Majora's Mask just overall always kind of just had a more dark theme to it. Things were a little more gritty, and a little more scary. And uh, a lot of people, you know, there's like some meme where it's like I can't remember the name of the enemy, but it's the enemy in Ocarina of Time that um comes up it's like a mummy, and if you get too close it'll like grip you and like drain a bunch of life, and it it's pretty scary. And then there's like one other enemy in Ocarina of Time that's a boss in the bottom of the well, or like a mini boss, I guess, and it's like this like white and red creature that has like these hands that can grab you and you have to kill it, and it has like this head with these giant teeth, so pretty scary. But you know, Majora's, you brought up Majora's Mask as well, and the moon itself is pretty scary, but those giants that prop up the moon to save the world, the four different giants from the four different areas, is also kind of scary as well. Again, we're talking about, you know, a loose fit here, not a full blown um, horror genre game, because obviously the Zelda would probably be like a, I guess, an action RPG of sorts, or an action adventure style game rather. So, but what about you? What do you think about that?
So yeah, you mentioned like this enemy. Like I really remember this enemy, and I don't really like this enemy also. But speaking back to the genres, I know for me, you're the specialist of the horrors games and stuff, no doubt about it. So I have a good question for you there. So we know like horror games have like kind of like zombies, they have like guns, weapons, they have like all gore items, bloods everywhere, vampires, and all those stuff. What do you think is like a very good horror games? Like what is the definitions of a good horror games? With like, is it like more platforming, is it like more like Resident Evil? What is like a very good mix of make a very good horror game?
That's a good question. So I think one of the biggest things to make a game considered like a horror game is it has to have thematic elements of horror. You know, blood, guts, scary stuff, things like that. And then, you know, when we're talking about loose fits, they usually aren't centrally focused on one of those thematic elements, or anything like that. So, you know, with my first game that I mentioned, the Addams Family for Game Boy, right? The Addams Family is generally thought of as like scary. There's a lot of thematic elements of horror that are mixed into the game. I feel like one of the main things that is a main component of making the game a horror themed game is, you know, just having one, two, three elements of the macabre, or having one, two, three elements of horror mixed in there. And I don't necessarily, to your other point, I don't think the genre necessarily matters as much as the thematic elements that are in the game, but some genres tend to blend better with those elements, right? So like Resident Evil, because of the, you know, the survival or nature of the game, and things like that, and zombies everywhere, all of the enemies that you kill being horror themed, and the plot, you know, revolving around the virus and the other things like that. I think all of those items together are what makes it like a true survival horror game. Whereas with loose fits, it's more just, you know, there might be some elements of horror, but the centralized plot of the game and the characters in the game aren't necessarily based around horror or that genre.
Speaking of someone who very put a lot of time this month about a very nice event of himself, Kingsizzle, he did like the entire month a lot of spooky games and horror games. I don't know how he did it, but he did quite a few games there. And I saw him play a couple of games, which make me very laugh. But since I'm not very a fan of horror games, well, yeah, I didn't want it to get too much spooky there. So, did you watch a little bit King Sizzle shoot?
Yeah, I've been watching him a little bit. He played like Muppet Monster Adventure, which I actually had a really good time with, and you could consider that like a horror game, kind of somewhere in between a loose fit and a horror game. It's a 3D platformer, so you're collecting its stars and things like that to advance. There's some boss fights as well, and overall it's a very fun and chill set. It's mostly focused on just collecting things, and then I think there's like damage lists for each boss, but the boss fights aren't too bad. And I enjoyed that game. I actually remember the reason I played that game is because I saw you playing that game I think a while ago, kind of back when we first met, or maybe a month or two after we first met. But yeah, no, I've been watching him play that. And another horror theme game that I've talked about a couple times on the podcast, but I can't stress it enough that it's an awesome game. So why not bring it up again? Is Dedeus, which is a homebrew for Game Boy, and it is just really, really well done, really tastefully done. Obviously, I have a bit of bias because I'm a big Game Boy fan, but it is like a game where you make different choices over the course of 3 days that determine the outcome of the game. There's a bunch of different endings. So you talk to different people, collect different items, and then use them in different areas to change the outcome of the game. But the plot is that you have a dream where I think like the world is going to end in 3 days. So it's pretty dark, but really, really well done. If that had been a Game Boy game back in the day when Game Boy games were made and not a homebrew, I think it would have had a great deal of success. And then another game that came to mind that I've talked a little bit about on the podcast before is Gargoyle's Quest, which would probably be well fit into the category of kind of that middle ground between being a full blown horror game and just being more of a loose fit. And it's a lot of fun. You play as a gargoyle trying to. I don't know the exact plot of the game, but it's a platformer. Get through all the stages, but it's got some RPG elements to it as well, like going back and forth, giving so and so the correct item to advance the story. But you play as a gargoyle, and you have like different powers that you can use or you acquire over the course of the game, like little projectiles. But it's just kind of interesting, that particular game, because there's RPG elements mixed in, like slight RPG elements. It's mostly focused on platforming. And one of the cool things about the game towards the end is when you first start the game, you're only able to fly for a short period of time. But at the end of the game, you get the ability to infinitely fly and you're a lot more powerful. So it's kind of one of the interesting things about that game is you start off very, very weak and the game seems somewhat difficult. But as you get a little bit further and you get more powerful, it becomes a lot easier to be able to survive. And another interesting thing about the game is that there is items that you collect that you can trade for extra lives, which I can't think of that many Game Boy games where that's the case early on. Certainly there are, numerous games where you can collect a bunch of lives or do things to cheese getting lives, but trading items for lives is kind of an interesting mechanic that I can't remember a lot of Game Boy games having. But it looked like you had a thought regarding that.
I mean, yeah, yeah, like you mentioned the Muppet Adventure. I mean, that was quite a fun games for to play as like an horror game. I mean, for me, not really like a horror game because more like platforming games. But in general, like I kind of like this genres in some ways because these genres can, like I mentioned, like can give you like a lot of emotions, a lot of stress, or a lot of very nice ways to see a video games like very gore or very hardcore or any like it's not like your typical like friendly games where you play. It's always like a good or like a new ways or always a new ways to seeing an approach to another game. So I think it would be time to introduce the other segment I'm gonna have for you today. So we're gonna talk about the things I do for an achievements. Well, this is quite an interesting segment because we already mentioned about how we put the time investment into how we play achievement, but now what we do for when we play for achievement. So do you have like do you want to start off this segment, shoot?
Yeah, of course. In regards to that, just talking about some of the more extreme and interesting things we've had to do to get achievements, and I actually have the perfect thing to start us off, I think, which was leaving my computer on over the course of the last day or two. A little bit of an unusual strategy, but it correlates to the specific achievement I was working on. I mentioned that I was going through Pokemon Red and Blue revision, and the achievement that I was working on is called Have Fun, which is to catch Chansey, Scyther or Pinsir, Tauros, and Kangaskhan in the Safari Zone in one session, where multiple Safari hunts are fine. So, the Safari Zone, catching those four particular Pokemon, they are quite tough to catch. They don't show up as often, and there is a significant low chance that they will escape when you try and catch them. So, one of the interesting things about that achievement is it can take quite a bit of time. And I don't have just hours and hours and hours in the day to be able to go through and do that achievement all at once. And it has to be done in one session, meaning session starts when you open the emulator and ends when you close the emulator. So what I did is I was actually lucky enough to be able to catch three out of the four Pokemon in one session, leave the emulator running, and then just leave my PC on overnight. My PC isn't like super noisy, so it didn't disrupt my sleep or anything. But that's just one of the more, I guess, um, extreme or different examples I can give. Maybe not necessarily super, super difficult because it's a lot of RNG and just kind of waiting things out. But one of the more extreme things I can think of that you would do where it would take you outside of the game and actually leaving the hardware on in order to do that. What about you?
Well, that's a very interesting strategy there, shoot, to just like what you mentioned, like just like leave your PC. I never thought about doing that, but maybe like if I'm doing for like a very long achievement and I need to not close my games, I think that probably like a strategy I would go for. That's very, I think I did that once when I was trying to play a video games or like a games on the PC, and I actually like let my PC the entire night to make sure I was selling my stuff. But that was another story for another time. One thing I think I tried to do like a lot for what I do for an achievement is, well, I don't want to be like too much frustrated in some ways. So what I do usually, if I need some information, I always look for the information it needs. So tricks are doing some, or like the guys, pretty much like the guys. Like every time I need something to figure it out, and I don't want to put like the times to, sometimes I figure it out, sometimes I don't. So that's one thing I like to do for my achievements, is I try to gather like most information as possible. And I like also to watch the entire set first, because every time you're trying to do a games, you always think like the ways you're gonna clear the games if you're going for the masteries. So do you go for disachievements, or rather disachievements? Are you going, example, like if you need to play the game in hard mode already, so maybe knock out the hard mode first, so you're gonna do like 2 3 achievement at the same times. So it's always has like what is the best strategies to go for an achievements. So that's what I tend to do. So are you the same way as me, shoot?
Yeah, I definitely do the same thing. I mean, I take a look at games and overall just review the set to make sure that I'm well aware of everything that I need to do, particularly if there's missables. With Pokemon, I bring that up because it's a good example of kind of just one set where you want to make sure that you do review all of the achievements because there are a lot of missables and they are all marked. Sets having missable or achievements that you can miss if you and then not be able to go back to on the first playthrough of a game are not all consistently marked across the board. That is kind of a debatable subject. A lot of people feel that they shouldn't be marked and that the player should just research the game more. Some people feel like for RPGs, which are quite long games, that it's just more of a courtesy than anything for the achievement developer to do that. But it could, the argument can be seen both ways. And to go back to your original point, yeah, I mean, I definitely review a set to make sure that I feel like I'm capable of doing all of the achievements within the set. On the same token, though, we talked a little bit about this last week with just achievements always kind of surprising us in terms of our ability once we've gotten into the game and kind of been able to polish up our skills and get through the game and get a lot better at it and kind of surprise ourselves sometimes with what we're capable of. But to as far as researching the achievements and kind of reviewing all the achievements as a whole before diving into the set, that's 100% something that I do every time, each time that I do look into playing an achievement set. But what about you? It looks like you had a thought on that.
Yes, I just think about a very good thought. So like another way to see like what you do, the thing you do for an achievement. One, I have one subject in mind: the creativity of an achievement. So what I mean by that is sometimes when you play like set or other stuff, you have like always like a unique ways to approach the games and doing some stuff you're not supposed to do, and it's always like interesting to do. Like I remember to have played like a MGN set where I have to do like a racing games, and I don't remember the games. I think it was like the Bugs Bunny or something on the PlayStations, and I was pretty good finds doing the entire games. And then I realized after like when I was close to mastering the set, which I did not, I needed to do the entire cup, which be probably like 4 or 5 race difference, and I needed to not touch a single item block there. So for me, it's like, well, that will be maybe easy to do, or I don't know. And then I realized after a couple of try, well, this is pretty much like unique ways to play the game, and it's definitely hard to play the games because the gaps of the two block or the two item block was very very close to each other's, and at the same time you have pretty much the RNG side as well, which like the CPU can bump into you. So I needed like for this topic we needed to do like how much the creativity of many achievements make you think of what you have actually have to do for an achievement, which is crazy, and I think should have a pretty a good example of it.
Yeah, no. As far as the creative side of achievements, it's really interesting because I think some of the I'm going to try and put this in a way that doesn't sound convoluted. So forgive me if I sound a bit convoluted, but I would say the more creative achievements oftentimes end up being the more difficult achievements, which oftentimes results in you having a lot more fun. Hopefully that didn't sound too long-winded, but I think it's definitely the case. There's your standard bread and butter, complete this level, complete that level, kill this boss, do this damage list. But I've always found that the more creative achievements are really interesting in kind of making you have to calculate and think about things a little bit more flexibly. Just be a little bit more flexible about how you're trying to break down an achievement set. You know, when it's just complete this stage or beat this boss damage list, there's certainly nothing wrong with those, and those are a lot of the time expected criteria, even off of retro achievements. You look at Xbox or PlayStation achievements, and you'll see a ton of those throughout a number of titles. But I think that when the achievements are more creative, not only does it kind of give the player some agency as far as kind of coming up with a strategy, but it also reflects pretty well on the dev in terms of not only their game knowledge but just the way that they're presenting this package or this achievement set to us in a way that makes us really enjoy it in a way that perhaps no one ever had in the past. There's people that they create their own challenges, right? That's a little bit of an element of how speedrunning came about, is people wanted to see how fast can I possibly beat this game. And then, unconventional methods started to kind of break their way into the fold, with doing glitches and different things like that, and taking advantage of manipulating the games in such a way that people weren't often doing. And so there is a really rich history behind it. And I think that's how kind of one way that achievements got started in the first place is how can we challenge players in unconventional ways to give them not only replay value on the game but enhance the gameplay for them and really push them to the limit.
That's a very good thought there, shoot, and which I would like to thanks for that. Like all the person who take the times and effort to create something like almost like a mystery egg achievements, or like a lot of the achievement where we it's always creative to play the way we're not supposed to play the game. So it's always fun to see that. And I got something very interesting in mind. Is what is for you, shoot, like the weird. I think the weird achievement you got, or you like a thing you needed to do into the weird way to get the achievement, and like the hardest way. So like for me, I think the weird way. I think I needed like I think it's like SM64, and it's like I just needed like almost like to sleep, like Mario when it's just like tired and just sleep and you get an achievement. So it's like something like those are like, okay, I'm just doing something, and then it do like okay, it's just fun. But sometimes you have like a very like hard setups or hard stuff to do to just make this achievement like very hard, and you're like, oh wow, I cannot believe I have done so much thing harder for an achievement. Like example, for me, I think I don't know if I mentioned that, but when I did play Paper Mario 64, I played the first time for fun, and then I realized after a month I needed to restart the game because I messed up. Like I think I messed up two badges because I did not transfer the badges from the Peach to my inventories. And then I needed to restart the entire games twice to get this one single achievement. So sometime, even if the achievement is quite like easy or not, you do things where it's out of your mind. I think I play like also like fire red or leaf green like twice or more than twice. Like sometimes I play like we play like the more and more of the game we're supposed to do just because we did a little mistake. So sometimes like I mentioned, we do like so many things for just a single achievement, which is crazy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Setup time is a big one that you mentioned. Setup time meaning, how long it takes to get to the specific point where you can get the achievement in question. So it can always be really frustrating with some achievements, and it makes them more difficult. Not necessarily in a creative way, but it just makes them more difficult to get. So an example would be, an achievement where it takes 25 or 30 minutes to get to the end of the game, and the game is set up in such a way where you can't continue, and you only have one shot at the boss, and so overall it makes it pretty difficult. I can think of something that's pretty similar to this. So I played Narc a long time ago. Narc, no one had the guts until now for the NES. And the hardest achievement in that game, from what I remember, was defeating Mr. Big without losing a life. Um, I can't remember if there was continues or things like that set up. I remember in my mind that it was very difficult, and it was like 25 minutes to get to Mr. Big, and then you had like a very small window of lives to be able to beat him, and the fight was quite difficult. So 25 minutes per attempt. We're people that have jobs, we work, we have other things going on in our lives, and so it's like 25 minutes per attempt. That gives me maybe 7 or 8 attempts, and so it definitely puts the fire under our feet in terms of the pressure that we feel when we're going for things like that. A lot of the times it just depends on how the game's set up with lives and continues and damage and health. Those three or four values are really what make the difference in, a deathless run or a damageless run. And there's some damageless that are pretty insane, and there's some that aren't. I know that I've watched people where they have like a 10 or 15-minute setup just to have to get into one achievement to go to get one shot at it and then go again. And I think those are always frustrating, and that's where, save states for practice purposes, of course, would be something that would be pretty useful and help the player. I haven't had to do that too much, really. I've just kind of toughed it out and just kind of smashed my head against the wall a lot of times with practice, practice, practice to get to that point. But I definitely think that that's a big factor. And also, you brought up a great point that without the developers, we wouldn't even have any of these great achievements to tackle. So quick shout out to all the developers that are producing achievement sets for us to work on. There's so many achievement sets coming out each and every day, and it really is a pleasure to be able to enjoy the set. So thank you again to the developers that are working so hard, spending their time doing this for free to make something that's fun for us to be able to enjoy on the website.
Very well said there, shoot. And we forgot to mention one thing we can do for achievement to this topic before we go into the next one. So we forgot to mention what we have to do for achievement, because sometimes we can clear stage, we can collect items, we can damage less, we can do something in one sessions, and we can do like many other things as an achievement for complete and getting. So we have like a lot of ways to get achievement into this website, which is great. So the last topic we have for today for you guys is emulation versus original hardware. So shoot, can you share your first thought with this segment?
Yeah, absolutely. So, emulation versus original hardware. I think on the very first episode of the podcast, we talked about the feeling or the excitement of going over to your friend's house and having that Super Smash Bros. Battle or that Mortal Kombat battle. And the first thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is, do you prefer the feel of playing games on the emulators versus the original hardware? And really, what are the pros and cons of both? So to kind of kick things off here, I mean, with emulation, you have access to the achievements. Obviously, at this point in time, there's no way to uh, do the achievements with the original hardware unless you're playing like more modern games that have achievements built into the network, like Xbox or PlayStation or something like that. But with original hardware, there's just kind of that nostalgic feel that you don't necessarily get unless you do that. I know for me, we'll talk a little bit about this here in just a moment, but even when I am emulating N64 games, I use an N64 controller to play them. I have an adapter, so it converts the N64 controller to USB, and then it plugs right into the back of the PC. Because the N64 controller has such an unusual layout that I feel like using any other controller would just make things a little bit awkward. So it is nice to have that original hardware as well, which is kind of a mix of using the original hardware but through an emulator to be able to enjoy the game in an almost traditional way.
Well, for me, I think I did only grow for the most of my life. Maybe like since like a couple of years, I'm playing like more emulation now because of retro achievement and the achievement. But before that, I was pretty much I everything I got was from hard work and buying some every time a new generation of games like the N64, Game Boy, GameCube, PlayStation, everything, every console, every games, every time I spent was into my original consoles. So for me, I always enjoy those. I mean, I prefer those hardware and stuff because I got like I work hard for my games. I work hard for just get. I think I like when I was a kid, like I could not spend like a lot of money to like buying the game by himself. But when I was a kid, I was living like into like a little towns, and then I was always into my bike, and I was like cycling through my city, and I was trying to find the most. Pepsi can, yes, Pepsi, a lot of Pepsi can and stuff, and some like finished drink and stuff, to just like having like those extra money, going to the stores and then trying to have the game for a day or two, and then bring it home and just feel a game where I could not afford. And I spent so many time doing that over and over, to just like trying new different N64 or Super Nintendo games a lot. So for me, that was like a lot of experience. And into the other side, which I like with hardware a lot, is you can play more with your friends, because you have like a console at home, you can invite them some friends after schools, and you can share play it, and it's like it's very fun, like going to a house, play Mario Party, bring your four controller together, play it, have fun. So for me, that kind of feeling, it's I mean that I think that's one of the best share moment I have when I was playing with my all my hardware. And yeah. So what do you think, Shoot?
Yeah, I think that again, there's something to be said about just being able to go to someone's house and share an experience with them and have a good time. And I don't really think there's a good substitute for that. I think people are doing that probably less nowadays, especially with the current pandemic that's going on. But I think there really is something to be said about physically hanging out with people and playing games with them and connecting with them through that. I know when I was a kid, you mentioned renting games, having them for a day or two. I'll never forget. There's a place called like Hollywood Video we used to go to, and we'd rent games, and eventually they got phased out. I mean, movie stores are pretty phased out at this point. I think there's like only one Blockbuster left. Like there's it's known as the last Blockbuster, and it's somewhere in Oregon if I'm thinking about this correctly. Don't quote me for that, but I think there's one Blockbuster left called the last Blockbuster that's over in Oregon. But the days of being able to experience games with other players physically where you're both in the same room, I think that they're still definitely there. It feels so different, because of how we're so connected with the internet and how people are playing games together. You could just say, to sum it up, really, that people today are connecting and playing games very differently from how they were 10 or 15 years ago. It's just that the technology is changing so much, and everything's online now. And it didn't used to be that way. The internet had a much different feeling to it 10, 15, 20 years ago. But with everyone having access to it, with hardware becoming cheaper, cheaper and cheaper, and just with all of these advancements in technology, it is a good thing. It's just, I think a lot of people long for the days where you could connect more with people on a personal level, and you weren't just two voices behind a screen talking to one another and not actually getting to physically be there. It's just like, it's like going to a concert, for example. That might be a good way to think about it. When you listen to your favorite song and you enjoy it over and over again, it's one thing, but physically going and seeing the artists and being there at the show and hearing that live performance is just, it really takes it to a whole another level, right? It's an experience. And I think we're a lot less these days about experiences and more about convenience. And I think that experiences are something that is just a little bit more special because of that. Experiences, because we're more in the digital and less in the physical. There's just something a lot more special about the experience that kind of makes it feel just that much more important to us as human beings.
That's a very interesting thought here, Shoot. Also, what I want to mention here is, when I was also like a kid, growing up, I I really like when, like, like the feeling when you have a new console, like just going like, oh my god, GameCube's gonna be live in a couple of seconds. So every time it's like you order pre-order every time your games you like, pre-order your console, getting ready, and like, oh, that's the day. Today's the day when a new game is released. So you have always your hype kind of like moment there with all the new console and new games, where I was always sitting there into my into the like the shop, a gaming shop, like just before like they open the store, and I was always the first, and I get always my copy and stuff first to get what I wanted. And also what I did a lot is every time I wanted to buy a game, example my Switch. When I buy my Switch, I pretty much sell a lot of my games to get that cheaper, because I have like a shop where they, example, I sell my Pokemon games, I sell Mario games, all my GameCube game and stuff, and they just make my Switch cheaper. And when I did buy it, because I didn't needed those old stuff. So one thing for me, the more I grow up and the more I when I discover art, is like the amount of, like, if you play like always hardware, which is fantastic for like a collection aspect or everything you want to keep, and the money you spend into that will always a little bit grow, because retro games are the more rare these days to just find. And having a good condition of a game, so it's always like a good, like, okay, this game value a lot to you, because it costs way more than it was before. And it's like, if I compare this to the emulations today, is like, for me, if I play emulations, I can play like more games than I was to play as a kid. Like, I never like play like Layton, or I never play like those games, because I cannot afford to buying the games. But now, because we have more technology involved, that make this like a way more cheaper ways, and almost the same result as if I play the real game. You cannot even notice the difference. I mean, you can notice a little bit the difference, but it's not as bad as if you play like on the console. So it's like a very cheaper way to try and experience like a lot of the games where you're not supposed to, you never did before. So I really enjoy more emulation the more it goes on today, because I can play my PlayStation, I can play DS, I could play, I will experiment like GameCube stuff in the future, Streamcast, which I never have as a kid, as a console, compared to my hardware. So the hardware, you always like spend like crazy amount of dollars, always for a new console, always for games you want, and at the end, for how much satisfaction you're gonna get, like maybe like what, maybe like for me, like when I spend like, for example, like Super Mario Party on the Switch, I play for a couple hours, and then I was like, oh, the game is very mediocre for me, so it's like, why keep playing it? I would prefer to play my other like fun experimentation to my auras and or other stuff like this. So I spend a lot, way too much money than I think I realize now than I should. So what do you think, Shu?
Yeah, yeah, I 100% agree with you. You talked a little bit about the collection aspect, and while it's great, and I've definitely got a stack of PlayStation 2 games sitting next to me. I've got my Game Boy collection as well. It can be a very expensive habit, and I think that neither you nor me are multimillionaires quite yet. We haven't won the lottery, so it's tough, especially when you're not exactly just flush with cash, so to speak. So I think that, like you said, the technology with emulation is getting to the point where you're uh, able to access more and more things at a lower cost. And you just have to have the PC to be able to run it. And it's not quite the same experience, but for those of us that aren't again flush with cash, or in a position where we're able to just buy everything that we want, it is a really great way to be able to access as much as you need for a very cheap cost. So, you can build a PC for a pretty reasonable price these days that'll be able to emulate just about anything, build an emulation machine. There's Raspberry Pis out there, which are quite cheap. As far as I know, they have no plans to raise the price. I think it's like $35 or something like that. Um, the last aspect I kind of wanted to touch on that made me think a little bit is we're talking a lot about consoles and hardware, and we have dove into this a little bit in the past, I think. But controllers are a big part of emulation. I mentioned earlier that I use the N64 controller when I play N64 games, but I'm a big controller fanatic. I've got, 4 or 5, let's see, like 5, 6 controllers next to me for different systems. I've got like my Logitech one. I've got my 8-bit dough as well, and it's I think at the end of the day for controllers, it always falls down to preference and how you feel and how it feels in your hands, and different things like that, the weight and the way that the buttons feel when you press them. But I've always really been a big controller person since I started getting into, I think I started kind of getting a lot more into controllers when after I built my Raspberry Pi and got Emulation Station going on that. But having a controller that's reliable and that you feel like is really versatile is something that just makes emulation that much more enjoyable. Personally, for controllers, I use like I said, the N64 for any N64 games with it's the name of the adapter I use to convert it for anyone that is interested in it. I'm not sure if it's available anymore since I bought this a while ago, but I'm sure it probably is. It's called the May Flash adapter. It's got 2 ports. So it's got N64 in and then USB out, just goes into the back of the computer. For everything else, I use a controller called the 8-bit DO, 8-bit, that's 8-bit DO SN30 Pro Plus. A lot of people use this controller. It's a little more spendy. I think it's about $50, but it's essentially a PS2 style controller. So it's got R2, R1, L1, L2, and then the PlayStation style layout. But it's a great controller. It's wireless. I prefer wired, but it's got like Bluetooth. It's got different modes for it. It has a turbo functionality built into it, and it's a really reliable controller. I know that some people prefer to use like Xbox 360 or PS5 controllers. So really, it falls down to preference. And again, $50, so it's not a cheap controller. But it's served me really well. I really enjoy it. And one of the nice things about it is anytime I use RetroArch with it, the button mappings always seem to work out really well, regardless of the system. RetroArch syncs up really well with it. So it's definitely been a great and reliable controller. And then I guess the other controller that I can think of that I've used a little bit from time to time, it's kind of my cheaper controller, and I still enjoy using it once in a while. It just really depends on the game, but it's a nice little controller. It's the Logitech F310. Um, it's got a PlayStation 2 or PlayStation, I guess you would say, style layout of controller setup. The one thing that's not as great about it is that the D-pad, the buttons are not separate. It's just one chunky D-pad, but it's still aesthetically it's a cool controller. It's got some Windows, like you can interface it with like the Windows 10 game bar, which I don't really do, but just kind of an extra feature. And then I like the way that the R2 and L2 buttons click. I'm all about the button clicks. Like I play with when I used to play PC games, play with like a mechanical keyboard. So again, it really falls down to preference. But I just wanted to touch on that subject a little bit because I know that people have their quirks with controllers, and some people like the clicky stuff. Some people like a soft button push. I think the thing we can all universally agree that we don't like is when a button becomes sticky. that's just the worst, right? So I was gonna ask you, Draco. I think I know what you're using hardware wise, but for our audience out there, maybe you could share a little bit about your preferences on controllers and kind of how you feel about that.
Well, my controller is also the same as an 8-bit though because I got that now. But I will always said and one thing: the GameCube controller is always the best, and it will still be the best because this is the GameCube styles. GameCube have the best controls, the better ability. You have a great joystick there. The D-pad is not annoying, and everything on that controller is the best. So yeah, I don't have anything else to say. I mean, this is the best of the controllers, and I like it a lot. So for conclude this episode, thank you, happy Halloween for everyone again. That's wraps thing up for today's episode of our podcast. Be sure to like the videos. Always like the videos. And make sure to hit the bells to not miss any of the episode we do. Let us know in the comments what your favorite retro sequel is. Thank you so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. And happy Halloween again. Thank you, Shoot, for today. That was very fun. And see you guys soon. Bye.